And we begin. Welcome to Freestyle Friday. This is Freestyle Friday, episode number 18. I'm Doctabarz, your host. And we will be today talking to Doctabarz, Keith Cross, who is a scientist and MC who is studying things like freestyle, which is perfect for us because we would love to pick Doctabarz's brains. So here we go. We are waiting for Doctabarz to enter the chat so we could bring him in and get this 16 bars of Freestyle Friday off and running. Maybe more than 16, maybe less. Maybe compound bars that may ultimately add up to more than 16. But we'll see. I just want to welcome you all. As I said, my name is Doctabarz, also soon to be known All-Star. I like to give myself a name that speaks to my future because it's important to think about what the future holds for all of us. Because if you don't think about your future, then you can't really project yourself into it. So that's kind of the reason that I'm soon to be. And then of course when I get there, I drop off the soon to be. I'll just be known All-Star. Who knows? So what we will do is we will bring in Doctabarz in just a moment. Let me just try to make sure that we are all connected here. Let's see. Give me 1 second. Here we go. All right. So bringing him on right now. All right, we got Doctabarz on, Dr. Keith Cross. Thank you for joining us. How are you doing today, sir, on this Freestyle Friday?
Hey, aloha. How's it going, man? Thanks for having me. Let me try to get a little more light. Can you see me? Or?
I can see you. I think we can see you pretty well, yeah. You got the nice tapestry in the background, So.
Oh, yeah. Let me close this door. Give me a second.
All right, take your time. So right now it's just you and I in the chat, but we're waiting for some folks to roll in.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I've only done like a IG live thing one other time with a friend of mine who's a DJ, and he plugs us in. So I was like, how do we do this?
Oh, well, you found your way to it. I'm glad. It didn't take too much time. So here we go. What we do is we have our 16 bars, as I mentioned a little bit earlier before you came on. People will get a chance to hear you drop some gems in the form of answers to these questions, yeah? And so what we end up doing is hopefully we end up getting to the bottom of this life as a freestyle metaphor that we here at the Full Circle team love so much. So let me first introduce, or have you introduce yourself, give people a little bit more background on what you do, where you are, and what you're all about.
Okay. I'm currently in Hawaii, where I teach multilingual and multicultural education at the University of Hawaii.
Okay.
And I pretty much am a lyricist and a scientist. And ultimately, man, everything that I do is about education, about elevating people, trying to free people up, really make them aware of the power that they already have. So whether I'm doing that, with a microphone or with an academic article or, with a class, it's pretty much the same.
Mm-hmm.
In a nutshell, that's kind of what I do. I know you're going to ask me some stuff specific to my work, so I don't want to kind of lead with that, I guess. But I've been rhyming since I was a kid, and at the time that I came up, our elders were still telling us that hip hop wasn't going to last. So like the idea of me being now at university, centering my research and my work around lyricism is like I always get a chuckle You know what I mean? Because at the time when I left high school, you know, there was a really, you know, like none of the things that, you know, youngsters in the hip hop culture take for granted were a guarantee. You know what I mean?
Right.
We didn't, you know, there were no platinum artists really. There was no, you know, the idea that, you know, I left high school and some of my homies was like, we're going to make rap groups. I was like, y'all do that. I'm going to college. I didn't see those things as like, you know,
overlapping or anything.
I didn't think that there was, I didn't think there was a middle ground. And yet here I am, you know, sort of pioneering a middle ground. I mean, not that there hasn't been hip hop scholarship since hip hop's inception, but, you know, sort of pioneering a middle ground in the sense of like really getting into, you know, the actual science behind the practice itself. You know, I think a lot of the scholarship up until now has kind of focused on identity stuff. Not that, you know, there's definitely been scholars who kind of tried to map the terrain of the culture, but not like a lot of people who are like really entrenched in, you know, the aesthetic forms and what mastery of that looks like. You know, the same way that you now have, you know, you go to any campus in the world and find a robust jazz program, you know, where we know how to take somebody from, you know, A to Z of being a jazz musician. Right.
Okay. So with that said, and that's, I mean, you know, we appreciate, you know, your kind of dedication to the academic aspect of it, because it's very important to legitimize hip hop in that way, you know, to put academic study, scientific study behind, you know, these concepts that were born on the streets, you know, the furthest thing from maybe in some cases the universities, at least from an American standpoint. So so the first thing we want to do is we want to get into this metaphor that we have called life as a freestyle, right? So how do you feel about that metaphor, and does it resonate with you? Obviously, I would assume it does, but to what degree, and what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely resonate with that. I mean, I think my whole life is that, like, you know, I'm an interdisciplinary person kind of by nature. And I think that came out of being an MC first. But, you know, right now what I'm doing is unprecedented. You know what I mean? Like I'm an artist who's trying to, you know, sort of forge this ground in this space that has only made so much room for us, and has even made room for us, you know, with like sort of these twisted priorities, right? So I'm often asked about like hip hop and education, and you know, we got definitely people like Chris Emden out there who are doing like meaningful work in terms of like, you know, using our culture to make to empower us in these educational spaces. But when I was asked, you know, when I got my job, when I was applying for my job, one of the things they asked me was like, was I going to be, I had done some work, you know, where we had young MCs working and doing science videos and stuff like that. And, you know, they asked, was I going to continue doing that kind of work? And, you know, my answer was really like, well, you know, hip hoppers can rap about, you know, MC can rap about whatever they want to rap about, like, but that's not what makes our work, our culture valuable, whether or not we can apply it to these, you know, sort of ever debated priorities of schooling. You know what I mean? Like, we don't need schools for what we do to be valuable.
That's true.
We don't need, you know, we don't need validation or anything like that. I think, you know, even my work, like, I don't do it so much for validation. I do it for psychological transformation for us. You know, for those of us who have internalized these notions of our intellectual and cultural inferiority that have been told to us, you know, so like, I'm not, you know, pointing out the science behind lyricism to change necessarily a racist perspective of Black culture or things that originated in Black culture, because obviously hip hop is now global. But, you know, I'm really trying to shift the mentality of those of us who don't really value, like, we have fun doing it, but we don't value it. We don't see that this is a, you know, a robust intellectual exercise, you know, any of the aspects of hip hop. And I'm rambling, so, you know, if I'm checking off some of the marks on the questions,
you definitely are.
You know, but you know, I like to point out that, like, although I'm in a university doing science around my culture, that, like, our culture has been scientific from its inception. You know what I mean? Like, so you take, you know, Grandmaster Flash, like, I mean, like, this dude was sitting there, you know, inventing, experimenting, and, you know, like, what we call turntablism was the result of experimentation, like, you know, really thoughtful, you know what I mean? Like, the dude has equations for how, you know, how we mix one song into the next, and, you know, like, that's science from
really
day one.
It really is.
You know, from day one. And it's a part of our story that is only now sort of being told. And it has to be told, because otherwise you sort of get this continuation of, you know, separating our talent as artists, as athletes, from our intellect.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, you know, like, you can't be a Kobe Bryant without being an extremely sharp dude.
Right.
You know what I mean? You can't be, you know, a Grandmaster Flash without being an extremely sharp dude. You can't be either of those, you know, good at either craft without being a scientist.
Right.
We're already scientists.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, you know, I would even argue maybe the original scientist, but, you know, that's a story maybe for another day and another time, perhaps. But, you know, that's definitely a valid point that you make there. And, you know, obviously, rest in peace to, you know, Kobe and all those that passed in that tragic helicopter crash. So you study the science of lyricism. We're going to get into these questions, these bars. Now, you already dropped some bars, so that you gave us the overtime score already, just in case we don't hit the 16, you know what I'm saying? So that's what it is. You study the science of lyricism and its impact on the brain, which is extremely important work. How did you find this path to study? Because you mentioned, you know, you kind of had an option of maybe going into rap when your homeboys was going into rap, but you decided to kind of go into college. So how did you find the direct path into like studying the brain as it pertains to freestyle and rap?
Okay, I'm gonna try to give you the short version.
Okay.
But since you took it back to, you know, high school, so I mean, this was a long time ago. You know what I mean? Like, I started rapping in the 90s. You know, so all right, because, you know, when I went to college, it was one of those things like, okay, y'all starting rap groups, I'm going to go to college. At that time, rap as we know it was not this huge industry.
Right.
Went to college, you know, but you find something that, you know, amplifies your sense of self. You're not going to let it go easily. Like, so for me, I grew up in Inglewood, you know, at a time when, you know, the Lakers was playing at the Forum across the street. Everybody in that city was a baller. Everybody in that city thought they had a God-given right to be in the NBA. And I was an average athlete, you know, and when you are an adolescent and you want the respect of your peers, I was always a bookworm, you know, and that got respect, but that was respect in an area that maybe our parents valued, maybe our elders valued, but something that we valued. So, you know, when I started rhyming, that was where I sort of found myself, you know, and also found my status. And so even though I went to college, it wasn't something that was easy to let go. And so I found myself around other rappers and so on and so forth. I did not graduate, you know, with a degree in neuroscience or anything like that. My degree is actually in religion. And, you know, I just kept emceeing and doing my thing. And it's not like I made this conscious decision like, oh, I'm going to be a scientist. Man, life happened. If I could have been rich making music, I would have been. You know what I'm saying? But I looked up and, you know, I was teaching. I became a classroom teacher. And, you know, my wife and I ended up at Stanford because, you know, that was just where we needed to go to make changes in education. I was still going there to be an artist, and it just made sense for me to go that route. Now, once I went that route, it just kind of hit me one day, like, man, like, you know, like rhyming is sort of like, you know, it's just where these three things meet. You know what I mean? It's a mixture of language, it's a mixture of music, and it's a mixture of cognition. And so I literally was running around Stanford with this triangle, like, this is what I want to study. And then I met Takako Fujioka, who's also co-authored with me on that paper that we did where we studied the lyricist brains. And she pretty much introduced me to a field, you know, the field of music perception and cognition. And then she taught me a neuroscientific method. I'm not like, you know, there's people out there who are hardcore neuroscientists. I consider myself a learning scientist. Like, I study the science of learning. And, you know, so I have, like, you know, I studied linguistics. I studied a little bit of, you know, neuroscience in that regard. But, you know, I'm not just going over the brain. I actually believe sometimes humanity, we get a little bit too concerned with peeking inside of stuff. I think all the evidence for what the brain can do is what we actually do.
Yeah, the results. Yeah.
But, you know, but I did do an experiment. And if you want to talk about it, I could talk about it, you know, in a nutshell.
Sure.
Yeah. So, you know, being an MC, I knew that there was something going on, you know, that might be observable using the technique that I had been learning. So that's the ERP technique, which is event-related potential. Okay. So event-related potential is, you know, it's referring to electroencephalograph, which is basically that swim cap that you might see with electrodes in it, measures brain waves. It's one of the oldest brain imaging technologies. I put imaging in quotes because you're not actually seeing the brain or, you know, like peering in the brain like you do with like fMRI or something like that. But it does have still the best time resolution. Yeah. Meaning you can see the brain's response to a stimulus at like, you know, at the millisecond level. And so it allows, you know, us to kind of, if you carefully design an experiment where you can really kind of hone in on this thing happened at this time, you can really start to see differences between, you know, whoever your participants are. And so that was what I was trained in. I kind of went in thinking like, you know, I didn't know that much about ERP. And so I was thinking at the time, like other people think, they like, oh, you just put the caps on them and have them start rapping. No, actually turns out you can't do that because ERP is sensitive to movement. You can't even swallow. You know, we have people we try to have people not blink during presentation of a stimulus because that has all of these artifacts that can distort the signal. Yeah. And so you have to come up with this really controlled situation that allows you to look at one thing. And so, you know, in my case, looking at that one thing, I was like, well, let's just look at rhyme. We'll look at sensitivity to rhyme. And so, you know, got all of these expert rappers, most of whom were, you know, in the area. I was in Stanford, so Bay Area MCs, freestylers in particular. And it's not so much that a lot of people ask me, do we isolate between freestylers and people who write or whatever? Because of the type of because of the way that science works, you kind of got to look at huge extremes first. Because if you see nothing at this huge extreme, then there's less likely that you're going to see anything here. And so we already knew, based on studies of jazz musicians, that, you know, like jazz musicians are a lot more sensitive to variations in the musical landscape than garage band musicians, than classical musicians, because of the improvisational demands of jazz, because of the complex chord structures and stuff. So they're processing just a lot more complex information. And so, you know, that results in a different type of, you know, response brain-wise than in these other cases. And so same things like, okay, with freestylers or with rappers, if we're looking for sort of sensitivity around rhyme, we could look at people who write, but it would be better for us to try to look at people who have to make these decisions in real time and have, you know, sort of this robust sensitivity, and then compare them to people who have no experience with it whatsoever. And then, you know, like what you, I'm sorry. No, I was going to say, that's a very interesting point that you're making about like the nature of doing science, right? Is to, you mentioned experiment design, you know, and that's extremely important for people to understand that scientists aren't just doing science in a laboratory. There's a lot of forethought that goes into trying to figure something out. You can't just figure it out by throwing something at the wall and seeing what sticks. You have to refine the inputs so that the outputs are, you know, like you said, there's a signal to noise ratio that's way higher, so that you can be sure that whatever it is that you're studying is actually what you're getting back, not just, you know, oh, well, we're just going to correlate these two things and call it causation, you know. So that's very important that you're mentioning there. I want to move on to another question here. And actually, I'll have you kind of give me the results of that study, because that's important. In neuropsychology, is that what it's called? Is where you published the study? Yeah, that's where we published it. Yeah, so tell me more about the results of that study, actually. So in a nutshell, you know, we had these experts, we had these people who had no experience, and we had to control. So we had to make sure that, like, we already know from other science that fluent bilinguals have, for lack of a better word, brain superpowers, and expert musicians have brain superpowers. And so if we're going to isolate brain superpowers related to rap, we need to make sure that nobody in this experiment on either side has any significant instrumental music experience and any bilingual experience. So everybody was monolingual, and everybody was, you know, was not an instrumental musician. And so, you know, having those controls, we can say, okay, if you see a difference, we know it's related to rhyme. And, you know, we didn't really know going in, like, what we were looking for other than, you know, we looked at a specific ERP component. They call them components. And so there's I'm probably getting too deep. I know we only got so much time. It's all good. In a nutshell, what we found was that they do process rhyme differently. And when I say rhyme, we had a sequence of, it was always triplets. First two words always rhymed, and the third word was the word in question. So they just had to respond to whether or not the third word was a rhyme with the previous two. We had a full rhyme. We had full rhyme stimuli, so that means everything matched. The vowel matched, the final consonant matched. We had half rhyme, so something like, you know, rack and bat. You know, so like, you know, K sound, T sound, and then we had things that didn't rhyme at all, neither the vowel or the final consonant. And so we had these three conditions, full, half, and non. And what we ended up finding was that, in a nutshell, the rappers were not only processing the difference between, you know, non-rhyme, rhyme, and full rhyme, and the non-lyricists were also processing that distinction, but they were only processing that distinction in the left hemisphere. And so, you know, left hemisphere is pretty much for language structure, but there was no right hemisphere response whatsoever in the people who are non-lyricists. The people who were lyricists had this really trippy right hemisphere response. And, you know, it's funny, like, if I wasn't a rapper, I wouldn't have been able to figure this out, you know, and then also, if I wasn't a teacher, I wouldn't have been able to figure this out. But I actually had a student who's Hmong. A lot of people don't know about Hmong, but anyway, she wrote a book, and she was telling me about how there's tonal indicators when you write in their language, depending on how the consonant ends tells you how the tone should have went. But just that insight, it's kind of like when you watch a movie and you like, aha, you know. So what's going on with rappers is, like, they were having this right hemisphere response where they were processing rhyme as music, like as part of musical structure, you know, and
like
so,
percussion or something, right?
Well, it was just that they were processing rhyme and rhythm together, you know, like, and so for the non-lyricists, you kind of got this thing where, like, okay, non-rhyme, rhyme, and half rhyme are all separate in the left hemisphere, and then over here you got this. Right, so these like very separate brain waves, and then over here these brain waves are all the same. In the lyricist, what you had was, like, in the left hemisphere, full rhyme and half rhyme were processed as the same. Non-rhyme was processed as separate. Go over to the other hemisphere, non-rhyme and half rhyme were processed as the same, and full rhyme was processed separately. And these were, by the way, half rhymes that don't sound good. Like, we try to rhyme rat and bag, right? And so what our interpretation was that for the rapper in the right hemisphere, rhyme has musical significance. And in that case, both a non-rhyme and an unsatisfactory half rhyme violate the completion of a musical phrase.
That's nice.
Right? And so essentially, we have some evidence that if you are a rapper, in particular a freestyle rapper, we don't know if there's a difference between people who write, but for these group of experts, they have the neuroplastic adaptation that has allowed them to sort of integrate the processing of music and language.
That's crazy.
That's it.
That's crazy.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, you know, there's so much, there's a lot to unpack there, but yeah, I mean, and we could probably talk about that for quite some time, because, you know, the way that you see, like you said, you know, looking at the results of not only the interpretation or the kind of the input, but also the output. So like, you know, when you have to create this from nothing and you have to kind of go into like your bag, so to speak, and figure out like what are the the conceptual metaphors that I already have stored away that I could just pull out of my bag and then throw at you in a way that will be pleasing to the reception on your part, that will allow me to, you know, that allow the listener to be like, yes, that is musical in a rhyme way or whatever. So, and that's something that we do implicitly. That's like a tacit kind of just not knowledgeable thing that we have as rappers. So that's very interesting there. So you mentioned you're in Hawaii. You had an interview with the Honolulu Museum of Art, and you mentioned that you became a scientist to learn how to become a better lyricist. So how can science help an aspiring lyricist or artist or creative person?
I don't know how much I want to say about that, but I mean, like, you know, like in the same way that science helped, you know, we talked about Kobe, bring Kobe back, you know what I mean? Like Kobe was an expert, you know, because he was scientific about his process, you know what I mean? Like, so for me, I went and got a PhD minor in linguistics when I was doing my graduate studies. You know, it's not like like studying linguistics made me a better rapper. But what it did was it gave me, for example, a vocabulary or not so much a vocabulary, but like a ready-made typology of speech sounds and symbols that represent those speech sounds that linguists been working on. Whereas, I had been filling in my journals and stuff, trying to figure out like how many vowel sounds are there,
right.
Like linguists had already done it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like just stuff like that. But more than anything, like being a scholar, psychologically, you can get further just by knowing the science that's already out there. Like you might have a vision for what you want to become, and maybe you get discouraged in pursuing that vision, and then you go and you read something, just some sort of principles of cognitive psychology, and you realize that, if I do anything, any type of task whatsoever, and I continue to do it, then my ability to do it is going to increase exponentially until it levels off. Like I'm always going to approach time equals, the T equals 0. You know what I mean? Like, so for me, although I've been rhyming for 25 years, and I'm decent at it, I, long before hashtags were invented, I realized people say like a lot. And I stopped saying like for 20 years.
Wow.
And what I did without knowing that that's what I was doing was I also trained myself not to think as much in simile.
Interesting.
And so, a rapper who ain't got similes is not much of a good rapper. So people think I'm good, but I think I'm terrible. You know what I mean?
Well, it's different flavors. And then, like, different flavors.
Yeah, but I mean, like, when you think about, like, do I stop here or do I keep going? Well, I got these books that tell me that even though I suck at thinking of punchlines, if I keep trying, I'm going to approach T equals 0. Like, where it's not going to be, so, like, there's that kind of thing, like just knowing the science of how the mind works, how we learn. I find all of that beneficial as being, and I think being a lyricist or being anything.
Anything, yeah. And that brings up a good point because, you got to think as the person that's watching this or as, people in this conversation, anything that you spend that amount of time on, like you said, it's gonna come easy to you. But what is it that you're spending that time on? And if you're not intentionally spending time somewhere, you're still spending that time. So you got to still figure out, am I wasting my time? Kind of spending it on something that's not valuable to me, so that I can be really good at that thing, which is absolutely valueless to me whatsoever. So it's important. It's important for people to kind of have purpose with the time that they're spending on perfection, because at the end of the day, you're still in the process of perfection of something. It's just, are you perfecting being lazy? Or are you perfecting being, a hyper worker? Or are you perfecting being smooth, or whatever it is that you're perfecting being? Like, if you do it intentionally, then you will get to that point. And so you just got to want to, you got to know what it is that you want to pursue, and you got to pursue that thing kind of with the passion of a scientist or somebody like a Kobe Bryant. So that definitely brings that full circle. So on top of all your...
What up, Cam?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just saw one of my people showing. Yeah.
And shout out to all the ITs that are in the chat right now, representing SOSA along with me. Thank you for joining. So on top of all your academic accomplishments, you are a diligent freestyler. You do rap. You are an MC. You keep a journal of freestyling on your IG at Doctabarz, which is pinned in the comment section right now. So you recently released an album, and you're in the process, I believe, of working on a second volume to that. So what do you see yourself as first? An artist, a scientist, an educator, or something else?
That's funny. I'm writing a song right now, and I'll give you a preview.
Okay.
You know, it's funny. Actually, have I written this part? So yeah, so I did do an album, Volume 1, King's Lessons. Then I released basically a mixtape, Volume 2, King's Lessons, Volume 2. And in both of those albums, I found myself really telling these stories where I'm putting sort of ancient wisdom in communication with our wisdom now. And just to answer your question about like what you are, there's a conversation in one of the installations to this story that I'm calling the Elders. And so like on Volume 1, I think I started with Elders chapter 4.
Okay.
On Volume 2, I told chapter 1, and right now I'm working on chapter 2. But there's a point in chapter 2 where I'm talking, to this character called Elder Root, and we're talking about sort of humanity or whatever, and I tell him I am human, and he says to me, no, what you are first is creation.
Wow.
That's deep. And so so I mean, yeah, I'm an MC, and I'm definitely an MC before I'm a scientist, but as I said, like the moment I decided to MC, I became a scientist.
There it is.
You know what I mean? And so like I don't, I mean, I definitely identify as a rapper, man, but I mean, like a lot of us run around calling ourselves by what we do, but then there's what we are, and what we do is possible because of that we are, you know what I mean? Not to be philosophical, but it's just kind of how I think it's how I free myself from the way that I feel about my do at any given point in time, but as far as MCing, like I do take my do very seriously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with being philosophical because, this entire project of Life as a Freestyle is essentially a conceptual metaphor experiment. You know what I'm saying? And it's also an attempt to try to make sure that, as we create this kind of precedent for people to be able to kind of reference back to and use it as a common metaphor, because everybody knows life is a journey. But life as a freestyle is something that I think, especially now in this time, it's important for people to understand, because a lot of people are locked up in so many ways, in the house or through sickness or whatever it is. So we got to make sure that people are able to conceptually flex and find different kind of pathways into their future, because, I mean, we don't want people to think that they are incapacitated. You know what I mean? Like your capacity is still there. It just may be bottlenecked right here. So now you got to go over this way where your capacity can flow. So it's about capacity, but where can it go? You know what I'm saying? So that's that. I will say that you mentioned in so many words that your musical pieces are experiments, and you are a scientist as a rapper. Or rap is a science in so many words. Like, if you really look at it from that way. So can you elaborate on that metaphor? Because like rap is a science, or musical pieces are experiments, is kind of similar to this concept of life is a freestyle, because it's the same format, same way of thinking about metaphors. So can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think I'll try to answer two of your questions at once, because I know you got a question about metacognition on there too. Yeah. And like, so, okay, go back to Rakim. MC means move the crowd, right? And we could take that and turn that into a metaphor. It's like, okay, as a rapper, where do I want to move the crowd?
Right.
How do I want to move the crowd? That's an experiment. Some rappers move the crowd back and forth. You know, that's what we kind of associate with, you know, partying, getting down, you know what I mean? Like that's, you know, like, and that takes a certain talent, certain craft. There's some trial and error involved, you know. Some rappers, you know, without me getting into like any particular moral framework, move the crowd backwards. You know, some rappers, I think the KRS One most immediately moved the crowd forward. You know what I'm saying? And so like, and I think that's experimentation. Like you have to, you know, if not, even if we think of just like, you know, sort of growing with time, like a lot of rappers become obsolete because they refuse to evolve their style as the styles evolve. You know what I mean? Right. But if the audience is evolving to hear a certain way, then you got to evolve to speak a certain way. Right. And that too is trial and error. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like I can't, even though my default flow is to get into like a sort of a gritty type of a 90s type of flow, if the kids is only able to hear in double time right now, a triplet, then I got to be able to do that. Right. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily like, I don't believe that anybody should just change their whole style to go with what's current. You know what I'm saying? But all of this stuff comes from our roots. You know, people talk about like, you know, quote unquote mumble rap. You know, to me, I saw there was a meme or something about like how Hammer did, like MC Hammer like did that same flow with the Addams Family theme song. You know, they want to say, I remember that. You know, like none of this stuff is new, but like, you know, when I heard it, I immediately went all the way back to "We Gonna Have a Funky Good Time." James Brown. Interesting. In Maceo's solo, he's like, you know what I mean? Like this is in our DNA. So I can't get mad at the young people and be like, they rapping this kind of way. Whoa. Yeah. That's how we always been. Right. You know what I mean? Like this is our music. It's coming out in different ways. Yeah. You know what I mean? But it's, you know what I'm saying? And like, so it's an experiment. Like, and in that case, you're experimenting with like, how do you stay relevant? I mean, I could just resign myself to just talk to people who come from my era. You know what I'm saying? And that would be fine. Ain't nothing wrong with that as long as there's some of us alive, there's some of us who could benefit from that. Right. But I think at any moment where you're attempting to move the crowd, that is an experiment. True. You know? And these pockets are relevant. You know what I'm saying? All of these are pockets, right? So pockets of flow, pockets of rhythm, pockets of style. And so, you know, while they may be available to us in the past as forms of like instrumentation, and then we take that and look at the pattern of it. Because, you know, one of the things in SOSA that we talk about a lot is like, you know, the pattern, you know, scansion of a rhyme or a poem or what have you. So you can see that there's, you know, iambic pentameter in something, or, you know, trochaic octameter or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So there's all these different kind of like chops that you see in the way that you can, and it exists not only in rhyme, it exists in language, like just speaking. You know, there's different ways you could chop things up and different kind of emphasis that you could put on certain syllables and stuff like that. So one of the things that I find about rappers that kind of connects them to, you know, the intrinsic human qualities that we all have is being able to find those pockets that feel good, you know. So that that is something that you may even be able to find that in just regular everyday conversation, depending on who it is you're talking to, what kind of dialect they have and stuff like that. So it's important to not knock the young kids, because there's going to be another, in 10 years, people going to be talking about something else. It ain't going to be Versace flow or Migos flow. It's going to be something else. And maybe it'll sound a lot like some jazz from back in the 30s and 40s, or maybe it'll sound like something that came out in the 80s that everybody today is saying is old school, and then everybody wants to bring it back because so many people are gone from that era 10, 20, 30 years from now. So, you know, it's important to think about things like that for the younger generation and the older generation, because like you said, we're all fruit from the same tree, essentially. So there's that. Last week with the hip hop architect Mike Ford, we were talking about freestyle and how it comes from the mind before the expression that's wrapped around it as one performs the mental to physical translation. So you got it here, and, you know, wherever that source is that you're pulling it from, some may say like the ether or what have you, but, you know, you're pulling that through your mind and putting it through the entire kind of, you know, diaphragm, lung, you know,
what is it, bronchial tubes and all that kind of stuff, right? And then you send it through your mouth. All of that, you know, kind of creation into the physical space as vibration, you know, starts in the mind. So can you speak more about, because you mentioned affordances. I was watching some videos that you had before. You talk about affordances. So can you talk about affordances and explain that to the people, and then talk about how affordances in the outside environment kind of operate as the kindling for free-flowing mental action inside the mind?
Wow, man, I don't even know what stuff you was looking at, man. I got to remember stuff I said. You know, I think, so, you know, I think probably what I was talking about, and this comes from a guy named Greeno, you know, he talks about like constraints and affordances. And so like any cultural practice, I mean, you know, this is now a cultural practice, having IG conversations, you know, like there's constraints, you know, that kind of serve as the boundaries or the structure. And then there's like, you know, affordances are like the resources that we make use of to make, you know, something happen. I'm probably butchering the definition, but I mean, you know, the easiest example would be like, you know, somebody like, you know, I guess we call him Father Freestyle, you know, now would be like somebody like a super natty, you know, everybody else is now using his technique, but like, you know, him talking about things in his environment, having the crowd, you know, hold up stuff, and now we'll have somebody read a list. That's kind of the easiest example, is just to, you know, talk how you can literally bring your environment into, you know, into your mind and then spit it back out, you know? Right. But I think, you know, for me now, it's funny, you know, and this is like something that like, you know, like Miles Davis, you know, like Miles Davis, you know, he learned his musicianship, you know, in formal schools and in the streets. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you know, in the clubs. And, you know, there were people who like, you know, told him like, hey, man, don't go to school because that's going to like kill your musicianship. And he was like, no, it ain't. You know what I mean? Like, you know, because like what was driving him was like, you know, that if I understand both of these worlds, then I'm going to be able to create a new one, you know. And one of the things that I'm struggling with right now is that when you get so theoretical and you see the value of the theory and applying that theory to practice, you can forget that the only way to get doper is to practice. You know what I'm saying? Like, so you can spend so much time, you know, thinking about theory and you know, so I'm thinking about ways of like doing, you know, taking affordances and turning them into, you know, my productivity, you know, but I'd still got to put the hours in to just getting on the mic and beasting out. You know, I can think about different ways to organize information, to process the information that's either in my environment or in my brain and bringing it out into a rhyme. But like all of that time thinking about it is not time doing it. You know, like, you know, Bruce Lee and, you know, Enter the Dragon, don't think, feel. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like it's really, it's a real thing. And you hear like, you know, guitarists or people who are like guitar teachers or whatever be like, look, you practice these fundamentals, but then you have to give yourself a time to practice just being, you know what I mean? And I think in that moment, like you and the environment become one. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like for me, I think I'm so mental. Like it used to take me, if I freestyle for 15 minutes, I could probably touch the zone once or twice. Yeah. But now I've become so theoretical that it might take me 45 minutes to touch the zone because I'm thinking about too much stuff. You know what I'm saying? And like ultimately what you want to do is be able to be. You know, if I was a physical martial artist, that thinking would get my ass beat. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So like it's the same thing with freestyle. And a lot of it is because, you know, it's not just COVID. I spend a lot of time by myself because my job is just so demanding that you know, you end up shadowboxing, and shadowboxing only lets you grow so much. You know what I mean? Like I find that shadowboxing, I'll be thinking my skills is here, and then I find myself in front of an audience and I'm able to take it up some notches, you know. So I think in those moments, Greeno's framing of affordances and constraints, it makes sense theoretically, but I think when you're in the moment, and then there's like flow state research, they talk about like kind of when you lose sense of time or whatever. Although I don't know how much flow state research, I have to look at it. I'm looking into it now, but you know, flow state research does talk essentially about the zone and how to get in the zone, but I don't know how much flow state research talks about the melting away of the distance between me and these objects in my environment. Like when I'm in the zone, there is no distance. Like as soon as I think it, it just comes out. You know, I don't have to think about it and then figure out how to convert it into a rhyme.
Yeah.
And if you just do it.
Yeah, you become a vessel for the message, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. That's very interesting. Man, I want to kind of go into that a little bit more, but I want to also make sure to, because we got about 15 more minutes, I want to make sure to touch on your kind of nutritional background. And, you know, you kind of have this like vegan or vegetarian diet that, you know, is very important to you. You actually, from the King's Lessons Volume 2, you have a post on your Instagram right now where you actually are doing like a trilogy of some rhymes where you talk about not eating meat and, you know, eating to live and stuff like that. So can you talk a little bit more about how, I guess, mental clarity and that ability to kind of either access the flow state or be able to kind of create from scratch can be affected by diet and nutrition?
So give me a second. Somebody just tried to call me
and
messed up the volume on my phone.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Fixed it. Okay, yeah, that sounds better.
Okay, we got you.
All right, so you were asking me about diet.
Yeah, and basically I was asking, like, is it possible that diet can affect mental clarity as it pertains to your ability to kind of like produce from scratch when it comes to freestyling and things like that?
I have to just kind of wing this one because I'm not like a super nutritional, you know, theorist or whatever like that.
Well, I'm just saying in your own experience from actually practicing that, you know, certain diets that may not include maybe some of the heavier and harder to process, you know, foods.
Yeah. You know, I don't know, man. I'm vegan. You know, I became vegan for health reasons. Like, you know, just you know, realizing that, you know, like most, you know, or at least reading the Master Cleanse book, and, you know, the guy said, like, you know, most of the times a person gets sick is because they're detoxing, trying to flush out toxins, but most of our toxins come from eating dairy. And so if you don't have them, you don't get sick because you don't have that many to flush out. That's why I became vegan. You know, like within weeks of me becoming vegan, I had this thing. I was in my mother-in-law's backyard, and you know, a butterfly kind of came and perched on my nose for a split second and flew away. And you know, then it dawned like, oh, okay. You know, I took that like, okay, welcome back to the brotherhood, because I realized, like, you know, nothing sentient. I mean, not that I think plants probably are sentient, but like, you know, no moving animal that would run away from me if I tried to eat it had died in those 3 weeks or had nourished me, you know. And that was kind of why I became vegan. But I think thinking about these sorts of things, like I can't talk about, like, you know, how health leads to clarity, but I did make a choice around my diet that led to, you know, sort of deeper clarity around the relationship between things, you know. And I think if you listen to that song, you know, it's kind of you know, a tribute to Mobb Deep. I took some of their beats and just kind of rapped over them, and, you know, turn that was it eye for an eye, time goes by, eye for an eye, and just turn that no beef for swine. But like the stuff that I'm talking about is actually stuff that we're seeing right now. It's like, you know, there's scientific reports to say, hey, you know, cutting down the forest, big agribusiness or whatever is actually causing humans to come into contact with a lot more animal-based viruses, which is what coronavirus is.
That's right.
And, you know what I'm saying? But the thing is, like, this is, you know, we got scientific journals saying this, and they kind of keep them down on low. You know, I just happen to have some colleagues who know that is their area. But then you got, you know, the Cherokee legend that I talk about literally says the same thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, so, you know, like just this idea, or, you know, there's a Losi mythology that I talk about. I sort of briefly mentioned on volume 1, you know. And so the Losi were African indigenous people, and, you know, this another story about veganism. Like, you know, this guy, you know, his animals and his just like the first man or whatever, he turned out to be wicked, and, you know, he starts killing animals and eating them or whatever, and his own flesh starts to die. His animal starts to die. Even his pot dies, not breaks, dies. You know what I mean? It's a different mentality around like, you know, what's animate, what's not animate, you know what I mean? But like, I don't think I wouldn't be making those connections if I was just sitting around eating hamburgers, because those connections wouldn't mean anything to me. I would not have taken the notice that like, you know, these indigenous cultures ran into the same problems. You know, they had their, you know, they were aware of COVID-19s or whatever. Yeah. And, you know, like they were aware. I wouldn't see that connection. Right. Because I wouldn't be operating on that plane. It wouldn't even be in my field of vision. Right. You know, so I can't talk directly about performance, but my life performance, I can definitely say that my life performance has been enhanced by my dietary decisions.
Yeah, definitely. So you have another song, and if I'm not mistaken, this is a different song called the Grow the Goods. Is that a different song?
Grow the Goods. Yeah. Yeah, Grow the Goods is a different song.
So what are the instructions in that song? Because that one is yeah, tell us about that one.
So I don't know how deep into my stuff you went, but I had done a song, Homegrown, a few years ago. And it's kind of like this bluesy hip-hop thing, and it's more like an anthem about growing food, but Homegrown didn't have a lot of instructions. And so, you know, this is when COVID first hit. I'm a Hawaii. So Hawaii is like, a lot of people don't know, you know, a lot about Hawaii, but like in Hawaii's indigenous history, like there was a time when like the population was about as big as it is now and everybody ate good because they had a system that was really rooted in, you know, understanding the cycles of nature and sharing and all of this kind of stuff. And, you know, now we're in a situation where, you know, when COVID hit, like, you know, they project that there's not enough food on the island, in the stores at least, to feed people more than 2 weeks. And they don't store food on the island because they find that it's cheaper to just ship it than to store it, right? So, you know, the situation is such that, you know, technically we could find ourselves without food here in a matter of weeks. You know, if things got bad, like if it got so bad that they closed the docks, you stuck. You know, and so, you know, and I should say, man, I'm a novice farmer. Like, you know, my plants outside don't look as, you know, I mean, part of that's my lifestyle as being an academic. I'm just not as diligent as I should be. But I thought I should, you know, sort of with Grow the Goods, be as basic as possible. Like, you got this many nutritional needs. These are some things that you can grow right now to meet those nutritional needs in a worst case scenario. Yeah. You know what I mean? And that was really what that song was about. And, you know, and it's funny, at the end of that song, I, you know, realized that was what led to me getting into the order that it came in was kind of the order that it happened. Like, I was like, oh, I'm talking about some vegan stuff at the end, but I was like, that needs another song. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. But I mean, yeah, that song is really about just, you know, getting things that grow, you know, and will give you what you need. These are some things, you know, everybody, like if you live in a hot climate, papaya, you know, generally speaking, if you got some water, you can get some papaya to grow, you know what I mean? You can't live off papaya, but, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, grows like weeds. It'll give you some of your carbs, you know, but just trying to just, you know, again, I'm by no means an expert farmer. It was just like, these are some things that you can grow now. These are your nutritional. You need to know what your nutritional needs are. Like, I need these things. I think it was 6 things I listed. You know, if I need these 6, and then these are some plants that can give me those 6. Right. Interesting. You know. Interesting. Yeah. All right. So we're running up on about 6 minutes left in the IG Live. But what I will say is, first of all, I appreciate where you're coming from with a lot of this stuff, because it talks a lot to indigenous people. And, you know, how they had things figured out prior to whether you want to call it colonization or gentrification or whatever you want to call it. And so, you know, it's important that as people are thinking about not only the science, but also, you know, the nutrition and also kind of like the culture of hip hop and how all of these things kind of fit together, you know, you got to really think about the source, right? And the closer you go back, the further you go back in history, the closer you get to the source of the information. And a lot of those people, their information got either wiped away or it's just hidden kind of underground. So it's very important to make sure that we keep that alive and keep the passing down of this stuff, you know, throughout history, because that's how a lot of the information kind of was maintained in the first place, was through either vocal communication or just
watching by example and just saying, okay, so I saw my grandparents do this and I'm going to do this, or what have you. And so it's very important to kind of keep these things in the flow, because if you lose them, losing them is not a good thing. We don't want to lose these things, because these are important, and this is what is going to keep us healthy and keep us active in the intellectual aspect of things, because, we need to be able to balance the action with the intellect, and the outside and the inside, and above and below, and all those things kind of holistically together. So I want to say I appreciate that a lot. What do you have any? I'm gonna give you an opportunity now, actually, to shout out some things that you might be working on right now, or some projects that you have that you want other people to check out. You mentioned you had some work. I've seen it on Bandcamp. But is there any other work that you want to shout out to people, or anything like that?
So the King's Lessons Volume 1, I worked on it with Scott Otoro. He's a Hawaii-based producer. You can find that out on Bandcamp, Zenbu Records Bandcamp. We got some limited edition CDs. You guys can definitely get those. And then I think overall, man, I think if there was anything that I wanted to shout out, and this might be to your followers or just how the word gets around, but like what you just said around, people don't realize, I think some people realize, some of us who feel, who are so compelled to realize that, like, if you hear a story around something like, the story of Icarus, or, the story of, various indigenous stories about floods and stuff like that, things that we take for granted, like, those things reached us because of MCs, who existed in the time before, who decided to craft something that could be inscribed on human hard drives. You know what I'm saying? Like, memorable, portable. As long as one of us is alive who knows the song, we can pick the information out of it and apply it. Writing it on tablets get broke. You know what I'm saying? Computers, this ain't the first time that humanity has had computers, but you have a big enough, bad enough natural disaster, and that kind of stuff gets used. The people who invented it, or, most of us can't invent a computer. We could talk all day on this, you know what I mean? Like, in terms of, we can talk on them, we can type on them, but most of us can't invent them.
Right.
So if something big enough happens to where the inventors of those sorts of things get wiped out, then the average person ain't gonna know what to do with it. You know what I mean? And we end up moving back in time. And, so like, I think one of the things that I'm really working on that I want to do, like, if I had a rich benefactor, so I'm gonna shout out my Patreon, and I haven't even put this on my Patreon in terms of shouting, but like, the way I understand my mission is, and I really, 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 really feel like, me, what I'm doing with these volumes is trying to create that record at least in one place. You know what I mean? Like, just, like, putting some things for the record. There's stuff that gets the crowd moving back and forth, and that's cool. We need to be present. That's part of being healthy. But then there's things that move the crowd forward. I'm thinking about 100 years from now.
Right.
What rap is going to be of value 100 years from now?
Right.
You know what I'm saying? What rap is going to be of value 1,000 years from now? And the proof is in the pudding. The Quran is a big old rap. You know what I'm saying? The Bhagavad Gita is a big old rap.
Bars.
You know what I'm saying? Like, those are the types of bars that stand the test of time. And those bars have to be re-upped from time to time. They made it to us. They were oral, and then they became written. You know what I mean? And once they become written, other than those who have committed them to memory, they become subject to being washed away in a disaster.
Right.
Which means that those that people have internalized become the next record. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, that's the work that I'm really about.
Right.
I do my job in academic and, try to do the whole neuroscience or whatever, because it brings attention to the work. You know what I'm saying? But the work for me is establishing that record, to keep us here and to keep, the generations to follow here.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So if you got any rich benefactors out there who was interested in that kind of thing, y'all please hit me up, look me up, you know what I'm saying? Put some money on my on my Patreon. And, free me and other rappers who are interested in this kind of work up to do it.
Yeah.
All right. What I'm saying? Because some of that, I ain't knocking none of the party stuff. Like, people get to judging, the culture. Yeah. I don't knock it. We need to party. We need to shake our ass and all that kind of stuff. because, you know, it's good for you. But that's not going to be the stuff that people can look to live.
Right. In the future. Yeah.
In the future.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, so anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all good. So Doctabarz, Keith Cross, thank you for coming on. I've been Stewie Kaz. This has been Freestyle Fridays, courtesy of Life is a Freestyle. Thank y'all. Peace, and we out.